I moved into Sycamore Grove 3 months ago. It was the kind of neighborhood where every lawn looked like it had been manicured by angels, where kids rode bikes without helmets because their parents believed in the power of suburban safety, and where homeowners association rules were less of a guideline and more of a sacred text. It was, in every way, the perfect place to start over. Peaceful, orderly, exactly what I needed. And then I met Judith Whitmore. The first time I saw Judith, she was standing in my driveway, wearing a pastel pink tracksuit and clutching a clipboard like it contained nuclear launch codes. Her haircut was the kind of aggressively short bob that screamed, "I'd like to speak to the manager," and the moment I stepped outside, she greeted me with the kind of neighborly smile that came with hidden claws. "Hello, you must be the new homeowner." I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "That's me, and you are—" "Oh, I'm Judith Whitmore. I'm on the HOA board." She said it like she expected me to kneel. "We just like to make sure everyone in the community is aware of the rules, keeps the neighborhood looking nice." "Sounds reasonable," I said, even though I already regretted opening the door. She wasted no time flipping through her clipboard, tapping her manicured nails against a highlighted section. "Now, I noticed your trash cans were left out past 7 a.m. this morning. We ask that they're brought in by 6:59 a.m. sharp." I let out a short laugh, waiting for her to do the same. She didn't. "That's oddly specific," I said. Judith's smile tightened. "Rules exist for a reason." I learned 2 things that day. First, that Judith Whitmore was the self-appointed queen of Sycamore Grove. And second, that my life was about to get significantly more difficult. At first, her tyranny came in small doses. A letter in my mailbox about the unapproved color of my garden hose. A notice about how my welcome mat wasn't HOA compliant because it had a funny quote on it. Then the notes started appearing on my car windshield, always signed with her infuriatingly loopy signature. But then she escalated. It started with the parking. At first I thought it was an accident. I pulled into my driveway one evening and found her Lexus blocking the entrance. I had to squeeze my car onto the curb just to get inside. When I knocked on her door to politely let her know, she waved me off. "Oh, I was just dropping something off at Sheila's. I'll move it later." Except she didn't. The next morning, her car was still there. I left a note. The next day, still there. I knocked again, this time less patient. "Judith, your car's in my driveway." She frowned at me like I'd just told her the sky was blue. "Yes? Could you move it?" "Oh, I'm only there temporarily. I have some guests over and need the extra space." I stared at her, waiting for her to realize how insane that sounded. "This is my driveway." She huffed, clearly annoyed. "Well, we live in a community, dear. Sometimes we have to make compromises for the greater good." Compromise? The greater good? Was this a suburb or a dystopian dictatorship? I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice even. "I'm asking nicely. Please move your car." She sighed, like I was the one being difficult. "Fine, if it's such a big deal." She didn't move it for another 4 hours. And that was only the beginning. The second time it happened, I didn't bother knocking. I left another note, a little firmer this time. The third time I wasn't so nice. "Judith, I'm serious. Stop parking in my driveway." She scoffed. "Oh, please. It's just a driveway. It's not like you even use it all the time." "That's not the point. It's my property." She folded her arms, exasperated. "Well, maybe if you were a little more neighborly, you wouldn't be making such a fuss." I took a deep breath, choosing my next words carefully. "If you do it again, I'm calling a tow truck." Judith laughed. Not the kind of laugh you share with friends, but the kind that says, "You sweet, stupid man." "Go ahead. The HOA won't allow it. I won't allow it." And that's when I realized Judith wasn't just some annoying neighbor. She was a problem, a delusional, power-tripping problem. The next time she did it, I didn't leave a note. I didn't knock. I didn't argue. I called the tow company. The manicured guy showed up within 20 minutes, hitching her Lexus onto the truck while I sipped my coffee from the porch, savoring the moment. The real show started when Judith stepped outside. At first, she blinked, confused by the sight of her car being towed away. Then her face twisted into something resembling pure, unfiltered rage. "What are you doing?" she screeched, storming toward me like a pink-clad hurricane. I sipped my coffee. "Towing an illegally parked car. That's my car. Yep, you can't do this. I'm on the HO board." I checked. Nowhere in the HOA rules does it say I can't tow someone illegally parked on my property. She turned red, then purple. "You'll regret this." Looking forward to it. That was when I realized I'd just declared war. Judith stormed off, but I knew she wasn't done. She was the type to hold a grudge like it was a family heirloom. Sure enough, the very next day, I found a freshly printed violation notice taped to my door. Violation: unauthorized modifications to exterior property. Below it, in fine print, violation: birdhouse placement exceeding HOA-approved dimensions. She fined me $50 for a birdhouse, and that was only the beginning. Over the next week, Judith waged her petty war with the precision of a dictator enforcing martial law. Every day, a new notice appeared on my door, each one more ridiculous than the last. Violation: mailbox height exceeds HOA regulations by 0.5 inches. Fine: $75. Violation: lawn ornament count exceeds community standard. Fine: $50. The ornament in question? A single decorative rock. Violation: unapproved vehicle presence in driveway. Fine: $100. For my own car. She was relentless, and she knew exactly what she was doing. The fines weren't about the money, they were about control, about making my life as miserable as possible until I either fell in line or packed up and moved out. I wasn't about to do either. So I fought back the only way I knew how. I documented everything. Every fine, every note, every ridiculous rule. She pulled out of nowhere. I photographed it, recorded it, and logged it like I was preparing for trial. I even installed security cameras around my property, partly for my own protection, but mostly because I knew Judith couldn't resist the urge to overstep. And boy, did she overstep. One night, I woke up to the sound of shuffling outside my window. I checked the cameras, and there she was, Judith Whitmore, queen of the HOA, standing in my driveway, hammering a wooden post into the ground. I ran outside in my pajamas. "What the hell are you doing?" She barely spared me a glance. "Oh, just setting up a new community initiative." I turned my attention to the freshly erected sign. Community parking, shared neighborhood space, planted directly in my private driveway. I blinked, then blinked again. "Judith, this is my property." She smiled, all saccharine sweetness. "Oh, don't be so selfish. This is a community." "Your driveway is a perfect spot for overflow parking." I took a deep breath. "Get off my property." Now, she tisked. "Let's not be difficult." I stepped closer. "Move the sign, or I'm calling the cops," she let out. A dramatic sigh, the kind that suggested I was the unreasonable one. "Fine, but you're going to regret being so uncooperative." And then, as if she hadn't just attempted to claim eminent domain over my driveway, she sauntered away, like she'd already won. I ripped the sign out of the ground and tossed it in my garage. 2 days later, another sign appeared, and another, and another. Each time, I removed them. Each time, Judith replaced them. It was like fighting a one-woman guerrilla warfare campaign, except my enemy wore pastel and had a country club membership. But then, she made her biggest mistake yet. I came home one afternoon to find my front yard vandalized. Okay, maybe vandalized was a strong word, but in HOA terms, this was an act of war. Someone had deliberately placed dozens of tiny decorative flamingos in my yard. Flamingos I knew were banned under HOA rules for being tacky. And attached to my door, a new violation notice. Violation: excessive lawn decorations, unauthorized, flamingos. Fine. $200. I laughed. I actually laughed. She thought she was so clever. She thought she could frame me, fine me, and force me into submission. She underestimated just how petty I could be. That night, I took action. I scoured the HOA's rule book, searching for anything that could work in my favor. And that's when I found it. A loophole. According to the bylaws, any board member caught violating HOA regulations 3 times in a 6-month period was subject to removal via community vote. And guess whose security footage showed exactly who had placed those flamingos on my lawn? That's right. Judith Whitmore. I sent an email blast to the entire neighborhood, attaching the footage, the violation notices, and a request for a community meeting. I worded it carefully, professionally. No hostility, no direct accusations, just facts. The response was immediate. Neighbors I'd never even spoken to chimed in, sharing their horror stories of Judith's ridiculous fines and absurd power plays. Apparently, I wasn't the only one suffering under her reign of terror. One couple had been fined $300 for having non-uniform flower pots. Another woman was threatened with legal action over an unapproved front door wreath. Judith had been playing dictator for years, and now she'd finally pushed too far. By the time the community meeting rolled around, the turnout was massive. Dozens of residents packed the clubhouse, whispering amongst themselves. Even the HOA president, an elderly man named Frank, who usually let Judith run the show, looked uneasy. Judith, of course, arrived last, smiling like she had everything under control. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice sugary. "Sweet. I understand there have been some concerns, but let's remember that the HOA is here to maintain the beauty and integrity of our community." I stood up. "Judith, do you deny placing those flamingos in my yard?" Her smile faltered. For a fraction of a second. "Excuse me?" I pulled out my phone and, with a single tap, projected the security footage onto the clubhouse's big screen. The room fell into silence. There she was, in full HD, sneaking onto my lawn under the cover of darkness, sticking plastic flamingos into my grass like some deranged lawn decorating gremlin. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. That's clearly her. Is that a crime? Because it should be. She fined me for a bird feeder last year. I bet she planted that too. Judith's face turned the color of week-old cottage cheese. Now, let's not be hasty. I scrolled further. Oh, wait, there's more. Here's footage of you hammering an unauthorized sign into my driveway. Frank cleared his throat. Judith, did you violate HOA regulations? Judith looked around, realizing she was losing control. It was for the good of the community. Surely we can overlook. Someone in the back shouted, "Motion to vote for her removal." Judith's face went from shock to pure horror. Frank sighed. All in favor? A sea of hands went up. Judith opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd met her, she was speechless. The motion passed unanimously, and just like that, Judith Whitmore, queen of the HOA, was dethroned. But just when I thought it was over, she had one last trick up her sleeve. Because the next morning, my driveway was covered in parking cones. And Judith? She was nowhere to be found. At first, I just stood there, blinking at the absurdity of it all. Orange cones, neatly placed in 2 perfect rows, as if a construction crew had scheduled a secret project in my driveway overnight. I sighed. Of course she did this. I grabbed my phone and checked the security footage. And there she was, Judith Whitmore, in all her disgraced glory, skulking around at 2:43 a.m., placing each cone like a deranged traffic controller. I couldn't help but laugh. The woman had just been publicly humiliated, stripped of her precious HOA authority, and this was her final act of defiance? Traffic cones? Pathetic. I grabbed the nearest cone, fully prepared to toss them all onto the curb, until I noticed something, taped to one of them. A note, handwritten, in her signature loopy script. I peeled it off and read aloud. "Community property now. You lost. Accept it." I let out a slow breath through my nose. "All right, Judith. You want one last round? Let's play." I wasn't about to let the dethroned HOA tyrant claim some imaginary victory. Not after everything she'd done. I grabbed my phone and made a single call. 10 minutes later, the tow truck arrived. I waved the driver over and gestured at the cones. "Hey, weird request, but can you tow these?" The guy gave me a look. Sir, these are traffic cones." I grinned. "Yeah, but they're blocking my driveway and I'd like them removed." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I like your style. With a swift, practiced efficiency, we loaded every single cone into the back of his truck. "Where do you want them?" he asked. I thought for a moment. And then, inspiration struck. "Follow me." We drove straight to Judith's house. Now, I wasn't a petty man, but I was a man who believed in poetic justice. So, with the help of my new favorite tow truck driver, I stacked every single cone directly in her driveway, creating a bright orange barricade of shame. Then, for the finishing touch, I taped her own note right in the center. I stepped back and admired the masterpiece. "Beautiful," I muttered. The driver snapped a picture. "I'm framing this." I tipped him generously and went home, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Judith had lost. Her authority? Gone. Her last stunt? Neutralized. Her dignity? Well, questionable. For the first time since moving in, I felt free. But just when I thought the saga was officially over, Judith delivered her final encore. The next morning, I was sipping my coffee. On the porch when I heard it, screech, slam, footsteps, and then, "What the hell?" I smiled into my mug. I leaned back in my chair as Judith stood frozen in her driveway, surrounded by her own cone fortress, her jaw flapping uselessly like a fish out of water. She spun around, eyes darting up and down the street, hoping for an audience, hoping someone would rise to her defense. No one did. Instead, a few of the neighbors, people she'd bullied and harassed for years, peeked out their windows, smirking. Someone even clapped. Judith turned beet red. She locked eyes with me, nostrils flaring. "You did this." I took a slow sip of coffee. "No idea what you're talking about." Her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. Then, without another word, she stormed inside and slammed the door. And that was the last time Judith Whitmore ever messed with me. Oh, she still lived in the neighborhood, but she had no more power, no more influence. Without her precious HOA position, she was just another resident. And trust me, people never forgot what she'd done. Slowly but surely, Sycamore Grove transformed. No more arbitrary fines. No more ridiculous rules about flower pots and birdhouses. No more power-tripping suburban dictators. People relaxed. They planted whatever they wanted in their yards. They put out fun seasonal decorations without fear of being slapped with a notice. For the first time in years, the community actually felt like a community, instead of a kingdom under Judith's iron grip. And me? I enjoyed every second of it. I settled in, made friends, and finally felt at home. As for Judith, she tried once to regain some level of control, muttering about reforming the HOA, grumbling about community standards. But the damage was done. Her reputation was unsalvageable. No one listened. No one cared. No one feared her anymore. And, eventually, she just faded away, like a relic of a time nobody missed. But the real cherry on top? A few months later, at the annual neighborhood barbecue, someone handed me a drink, clinked their bottle against mine, and grinned. "Hey, man. Just wanted to say, thanks for taking down the dictator." I laughed. Glad to be of service. And from across the lawn, I spotted Judith, sitting alone at a picnic table, watching everyone laugh, drink, and enjoy their new, improved neighborhood, one that no longer belonged to her. I raised my bottle in a silent toast. She scowled, I grinned, and with that, the reign of Judith Whitmore was officially over, for good.